Well, welcome to our next study in a topic, Unshakable Faith. Today we're going to talk about walking. Do you like to walk? This is one of my favorite places to walk. It's a trail not very far from my office, and it's a place that I treasure very greatly. The United States, in modern American culture, walking is usually something we do for recreation or for exercise. We don't view walking very much as a form of transportation. It would probably be a lot better for us if we did more walking for transportation and incorporated it more into our daily activities like people in a lot of other countries do. In fact, there's a lot of discussion among architects and city planners about making walkable communities. There's some talk that Oxford Commons is going to grow in that direction. But, you know, if you go back to Jesus' time, if you go back to the time of the book of Hebrews, or specifically today, the book of Luke, walking was transportation. I always get a little amused around Christmas time. People like to talk about the birth of Christ. There's really no evidence that it occurred at that time of year. But anyway, people like to do it. There's always Mary riding this donkey. I always think about, how do you know they had a donkey? I'm skeptical. I don't think they could afford a donkey myself. But anyway, they always show her riding the donkey. I think she walked. Great book by William Faulkner, our local treasure, Light in August. He starts off with a story of a pregnant woman, and she's been walking from Alabama to all the way into Mississippi, and she's pregnant, and she says, "Ain't it amazing how a body gets around, all this way of walking?" So poor people and a lot of other people in this world do a lot of walking. And that's what happens today in the passage that we're going to be looking at, Luke 24. Besides being good exercise, there's some evidence that walking is good for our mood. It's good for depression. It's good for grief and mourning. And so there are these two disciples, one named Cleopas, the other one we don't know. We assume it was a man, but we're not sure. And they're walking from Jerusalem to the village of Emmaus, which we're told is about 7 miles away. Now, 7 miles is maybe a little bit further than you and I normally walk for fun at one time. But evidently it was not such a big deal for them to walk 7 miles. And they gave them a lot of time to talk. And so we're going to be looking some at their journey together and what they talked about in today's study. So I hope you'll stay tuned and join in and get your Bible, your pencil, your handout, if you got the handout in the email that I sent to you. And let's take a look at today's topic, which is called Hopeless Faith. Well, before we talk about that walk with our friends in Luke 24, I'd like to talk just a minute about some things we talked about last week as a way of review. We covered the last little snippet of Hebrews 11 and then on to chapter 12, which says, "Let us run with perseverance the race that has been marked out for us." And so I got thinking about that. It got me to thinking about the old story of the race between the turtle and the rabbit, or sometimes we say the tortoise and the hare. And this is a story that's very, it's a popular children's story. We read it and we tell it to children a lot. And it's one of these stories my kids used to get tired of me because it has a moral, it has a moral. And the story is that this rabbit and this turtle were going to have a race, and the rabbit was confident, "I can outrun a turtle, no problem, because I can run so fast." And they said go, and they started off, and the rabbit took off at his usual pace, and the turtle took off at his usual pace. And the rabbit got so far ahead he couldn't even see the turtle. So he stopped. He thought, I'm going to get a little something to eat. So he stopped and got over in somebody's garden and, was eating some lettuce or something. And that reminded him of somebody that lived over the hill that he wanted to talk to. He's sure he had plenty of time because the turtle was so slow. So he went over the hill and was visiting. So he kind of got distracted from the race. At the very end, he remembered that he was in a race. And so he got back on the course and ran just as fast as he could, and he crested the hill, and there was the finish line, and the turtle, who had been just slogging along the whole time, crossed the finish line ahead of the rabbit. And so the moral of the story is obvious, and that is long-term consistent effort beats a flashy short-term effort every time. The self-discipline, as the Hebrew writer puts it, running the race with perseverance. And there's a lot of talk about this in the New Testament, the importance of being steadfast. You know, Jesus told several parables where he emphasized the importance of consistent spiritual discipline. You know the one about the wise and foolish virgins that had the oil, and the foolish ones, they ran out of oil. They said, "Hey, could you loan us some oil?" The bridegroom's coming. He said, "Sorry, we only have enough for ourselves. You'll have to go and buy some." Well, they went and bought some, came back in a hurry, but it's too late. The door was shut. And so the emphasis is on a long-term, sustained, consistent effort, spiritual discipline. You may do great things for the Lord for 2 weeks, or for 2 months, or for 2 years. What the Lord wants to see is a lifetime of steady commitment. The race we're called to run, therefore, is more like a marathon than it is like a sprint. So that's something I get out of that word perseverance in Hebrews chapter 12. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Well, now we can get back to that walk we were talking about earlier. And I'm just going to read the passages on the back of your sheet if you happen to print out the handout for this time, or page 2 to put it how you printed it out. We're going to start in Luke 24, verse 13. 24:13. Now that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. Now, it's important to get the gist of this story about what day that same day was. And so, reading through the book of Luke, this is the Sunday after Jesus was crucified. There's a lot of discussion. It's very fashionable to say that Jesus was crucified on Friday. I, for one, think there's really good evidence that he was actually crucified and placed in the tomb on Thursday evening, to get 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb. But that's beside the point being made here. I think everybody understands that this is Sunday, the Sunday that Jesus rose from the tomb. There's no question about that in reading text. So that same day is the same day that some people had gone to the tomb and found it empty. And so these guys start in Jerusalem, and they're walking to the village of Emmaus. It's not the Sabbath day, so they can walk as far as they want to. And we don't know if they're going for business, if they're going for, quote, pleasure. There's a great restaurant out there. They've got to go eat there. You think? I don't know. Anyway, we don't know what their business is, but that is their journey. And maybe it's just leg one of a longer journey, and we'll see later their itinerary gets abruptly changed. And they were talking with each other about everything that had happened. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" What's going on is these guys are disciples, and they felt a great personal attachment to Jesus and a great personal attachment to their vision for his kingdom. And so they're grieving the loss of 2 things here. They're grieving the loss of a friend, teacher, and mentor, and they're grieving almost as painfully, maybe even more painfully, the loss of a dream. The loss of a dream. Grief is a difficult task, and it has many side effects. no two people grieve exactly the same way, and no person grieves the same, different losses the same way. But here's some things that people do when they grieve. This is called normal grief. Feeling emotionally numb, feeling restless, having difficulty sleeping, developing symptoms similar to the person that died. And here's one that's germane to today's story: telling and retelling stories about the person who has died and the experience of his death. That must have been an important part of their discussion. To lose a person in a violent death, such as crucifixion, must have been something that that had such a huge emotional blow, and they're trying to come to grips with it, telling and retelling the stories about this person. Somebody has said that grief is like that old movie Groundhog Day. If you don't know about Groundhog Day, you probably should see the movie. But it's about a television reporter who's really not a very nice person. And he's sent on February 2nd to the little town in Pennsylvania where the groundhog comes out. They always have this big festival there around Groundhog Day. So he's gone there to cover Groundhog Day. And so he does that and goes to bed, and he wakes up the next morning, and it's Groundhog Day over again. So he does this, and then he does it again and again and again. So he keeps going through it, and gradually his character improves, and all these interactions, all these conversations, he gets the same one every time, but he learns to behave in a more mature and responsible and admirable fashion. He goes through it all again and again, and that's what we try to do with grief, is we go through it all again and again and again in a search, a quest to get it right. And so that's what these guys are doing as they walk along. Feeling mood changes over the slightest things, being angry or irritated at the wrong person, experiencing intense preoccupation with the life of the deceased, feeling self-pity, feeling intense fear, feeling overwhelmed, disruption of normal eating and sleeping patterns, needing the consistent presence of a trusted adult, and so forth and so on. This is what these guys are helping each other with. And so I find it touching that in the midst of their confusion and grief, they have each other. And they have this journey to make. And again, we don't know if it's business, if it's pleasure, or if it's therapeutic. But they are walking along and talking with each other and listening to one another. And I'm thinking that however painful that must seem, that is healthy grieving. So we don't know how long it took to walk 7 miles. We don't know how rugged or bumpy the road was. 2 to 4 hours, something like that. I'm kind of a slow walker. It would probably take me, nearly 3 hours to walk 7 miles. But let's walk along with them just a little bit more. So what happens is that Jesus overtakes them. He is behind them, and he catches up with them, it says, and he is coming from the direction of Jerusalem, because Cleopas says, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know these things? Haven't you heard? Don't you have a smartphone? Don't you listen to the news? Don't you watch the news? How could you not know? Everybody knows. Everybody's been talking about this. It's such a horrific thing." And he asks the question here in verse 90, what things do I not know about? About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. Now, if you don't remember anything else that we talk about in this lesson, this is the phrase that is the key for the whole idea of hopeless faith, which is our topic today. And they said, but we had hoped. To me, this is one of the saddest sentences in the Bible. Because I think most people, myself, can tolerate almost anything if we have hope that in the future things are going to get better, if we have hope for some sort of a positive change in the future, then we can tough it out minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, year by year. If we have hope that we're moving towards a better state, a better situation. But when you put hope in the past tense, that's really a tough thing. We had hoped. We had hope. There's more to it here, though. I want you to notice this. He said, well, what things? I said, well, you don't know about Jesus of Nazareth? He was a great prophet. Now notice here, they don't say he was the Messiah. Now, the idea that Jesus was the Messiah wasn't really noised about a lot, but his disciples believed it because Peter made that great confession when Jesus said, "Who do men say that I am?" And they said, "Well, who do you say that I am?" And Peter said, "Well, you're the Messiah. You're the Messiah." So although they were, you get killed for that in the book of Luke. Finally, the chief priest, out of frustration, said, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus said, "You said it." So that's what got him crucified. But they knew he was. But now their understanding of Jesus has taken a big step down. Instead of saying he was the Messiah, they say, "Well, he was a great prophet. We had hoped that he was the one." But how does the Messiah be the Messiah if he gets killed before he, ushers in his kingdom? And particularly killed in such a cursed way. The Old Testament said, "Curses everyone who is hanged on a tree." What could be more cursed, more disgusting, more shameful than to be nailed naked on a wooden cross by pagan Romans and left to hang there and suffer and die? This is the ultimate shame and disgrace. This indicates God has turned his back. And so they just can't add it all up. But for one thing's for sure, they've wised up now. Jesus wasn't the one to redeem Israel. You see, this was the job of the Messiah. This is what Messiah was all about, was to redeem Israel. Because right now, Israel is dominated by these pagans who eat pigs, these pagans who worship idols, these pagans who have these coins with, Caesar Augustus, the Son of God, written on it, these pagans that carry around these images as their military standards, these pagans who build monuments to their emperors as though they are gods, and their emperors are horribly immoral and horribly sexually immoral, horribly bloodthirsty, and they worship and glorify all this sort of thing. And so they are over us, they govern us, they pick our high priests, and we need a leader who can come in and deliver us, who can lead us, first of all, to be spiritually pure ourselves and then get rid of this horrible yoke that's on our necks. And we had hoped, and we know the Messiah will come someday, and we thought he was the one. We had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. So, kind of the center of this whole story are these two disciples, Cleopas and the unnamed one. And so the question on your sheet here is, did they have unshakable faith? And my answer is clearly no. Clearly no. Their faith was shaken by this tragedy. And so they don't have unshakable faith. But I want to point out that even though their faith has been severely challenged and shaken, they haven't given it up. They haven't given it up. They haven't given up the hope that, someday there'll be redemption for Israel. They haven't given up the hope that Israel is God's chosen people. They haven't given up their faith and belief in God. They're struggling. They're confused. They're wondering, how can there be a good God a powerful God that allows this kind of horrific evil to occur, this level of injustice? And so they're stumbling in their faith. They're wondering. Everything has been blown up. Everything has been exploded. and turned upside down. And the point that I want to make that helps me, and I hope it will help you too, in going with our theme of unshakable faith, is at times when our faith has exploded, when our world has exploded and caused our faith to take a pounding, that God responds to that need even if we can't see him. And in this case, he came and walked with them. Think about that for a minute. He just walked with them. You know, I often thought about, it's almost humorous if you have kind of a quirky sense of humor, which maybe I do. But Jesus goes to Lazarus' home, and he's dead. And he delayed getting there. I guess so Lazarus would die, okay? So he gets there, and Lazarus is dead, and the sisters rush out, and they say, or first of all, Martha rushes out and said, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. There's that anger. And he doesn't respond. He said, your brother will live again. Doesn't argue with her. He said, your brother will live again. And then Mary comes out and says the same thing. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And he doesn't even reason with her. He just said, well, where have you laid him? So they go to the tomb. There's the tomb. And then your favorite memory verse, Jesus wept. I often think, well, Jesus wept. Why didn't he get on with it? He's going to raise the guy from the dead. Why didn't he say, watch this, don't cry anymore. I'm here to bring you some good news. Cheer up, people, watch this. But instead, before he raises Lazarus from the dead, Jesus wept. And don't you think Jesus knew what these two, he's God, right? So he knows what they're talking about, even if he couldn't hear them, even if they had been talking before he caught up with them. He says, what are you talking about? And so, when our world is exploded, our faith is shaken, disciples can feel confident that God knows and that he walks with them. When he's walking, they may not see him, they may not know him, they may not recognize him, but he's making the trip. He's making the grief trip. And for a lot of us, that's where we are in this kind of life cycle where, things are good, we've got it figured out, then something bad happens, then our world explodes, our faith is challenged, and then down the road, hopefully, we have some sort of a new revelation, a new realization, a new stasis arises, and things are good again. This is life. We go through ups and downs. And so a lot of us are on that trip where these guys are right now saying we had hoped. And we're on the trip, and we can't see things ever getting better, and Jesus is walking the trip with us. So that's where we are. And we could stop there, but I think it would be helpful for us to continue the discussion, continue the trip, because what happens next is, I guess people like, elders and preachers and just mature disciples occasionally will talk about how to comfort the bereaved. In fact, Les Ferguson, if you ever watched this, we'd like a whole sermon from you on that, how to comfort the bereaved, because I'm sure that because of your life experience, you can tell us a lot of ways about how to not comfort the bereaved. But anyway, we'd all like to have better skills. What do you say? We're always scared to go to a visitation. What do you say? What Jesus does here, I'm not sure it's recommended that any of us try to do this. So they say, we had hoped he was the one. Then, verse 25, he said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. He says, you got two problems. First of all, you're fools. You're foolish. Number two, you don't believe the Bible. That's not very comforting. That's not that's not in my book of how to comfort the bereaved. That's what Jesus does, though. Now, on Jesus' side of the equation, at least 3 times in the book of Luke, he's told them, look, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to get mistreated, spit on, beaten, crucified. On the third day I'll rise again. They don't get it. Okay, he's told them 3 times. They never got it. And so maybe they do need a little bit of correction here, of upbraiding. He goes on and says, he says, did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. That's a verse that you can read all your life and not get it. Not get it. And for sure, the Jews didn't get it, and for sure these two guys didn't get it until he explained it to them again. And that is the concept of a suffering Messiah. Frankly, we want a Messiah who is a winner. We want a Messiah who is the victorious conqueror. And there are some pictures in the Bible of, like in the book of Revelation, of the Messiah riding a great horse with a sword for a tongue, and he's there to vanquish all the evil. But a suffering Messiah, that's a little bit hard to sell, because Jesus said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself daily and take up his cross and follow me. He said, servant's not greater than his master, So if this is what happens to me, what do you think is going to happen to you? We used to sing a song about, must Jesus bear the cross alone and all the world go free? No, there's a cross for everyone, and there's a cross for me. And, I'm thinking he may be talking more about more than just, health problems because of bad choices I've made. He may be talking about the broken world we live in, and some of the other things that we talked about last week as far as persecution and so forth goes. So at any rate, he says, if you believe in the Messiah that they talk about in the Bible, and you read it closely, you'll see the Messiah had to suffer, or he's not the Messiah. And if you're going to say he's not the one because he got crucified, then you're foolish, because this is what it's all about. He's not going to redeem Israel without making an atoning sacrifice. So he does something really neat here, and that is he goes to the Bible. Who knew that you can answer spiritual questions by delving in to the scriptures? If we can't fit it in a 20-minute sermon, if it's not something that's really simple, sweet, and we can just read, a modern translation, and it was just, such a great uplifting thought, we can write it on a 3x5 card, and the fact that we'd have to dig and struggle, and it's mental work to study this thing out. That's what Jesus did, though. He went back to the scriptures. He went back to the Bible and corrected their concept of the Messiah. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, stay with us, for it is nearly evening, the day is almost over. So he says, it's too dark, you don't want to go to the next town? Come on in with us, we'll buy your supper, you can stay here. So when he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. And they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. Pretty excited. There's a combination here that I'd like to call your attention to between the intellectual and the emotional. Jesus reasoned with them from the scriptures about prophecies about the Messiah and about the Messiah having to suffer. But they said while he was doing this, they said our hearts burned within us. Now, a lot of people have come up with ideas about why they didn't recognize Jesus. And I have my own ideas. Maybe it had something to do with the kind of the Arab headdress that he had on, or maybe it's just not expecting to meet him there. Anything, At any rate, they did recognize him though when he broke the bread. And for me, this is hugely symbolic that we meet the Lord and that he heals our disappointments around the table where he breaks the bread. And, all the regrets involved in the global pandemic, one of the regrets is that we have to do that remotely now. But I hope that you do it. I hope you turn on the live stream of the worship and participate in that breaking of the bread. And I, for one, will make a pitch for making that a longer and more prominent part of those virtual services and of our services when, Lord willing, we're able to reassemble together again. Because it says, verse 35, then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. Well, my prayer for you is that you will recognize Jesus in the breaking of the bread, and that when your faith is hopeless, you will find him walking with you. This has been a great study. Next week we'll have kind of a little final exam, review of this whole topic of unshakable faith. If you have some ideas for a topic to study after Unshakable Faith, starting 2 weeks from today, please send me an email or give me a call. I'd love to hear from you. Talk to you later. Bye.